I'm Pamela D Wilson, a caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. And today we are going to talk about what caregivers need to know and learn, especially if you are in the early stages of caregiving or if you see family members or friends who are caregivers and you're kind of wondering, what should I expect? What women and men should know about caregiving. This broadcast and this topic is going to be translated into an episode for my podcast, The Caring Generation. So if you have people who might be interested in coming back to watch it, they can come back and watch it on my social media channels. This is broadcasting on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Vimeo. And if you want to know more about me, my website is PamelaDWilson.com. So today's topic is pretty broad, and it really has come up from what has happened and what caregivers have asked me in the past 30 days since I've last been with you. Things like, oh my gosh, how are we supposed to know this would have happened? My parents aren't understanding what's going on. How do I explain this to them? My siblings aren't getting along. Wow, I didn't know that care was this expensive. How could we have better prepared for all of this? And what's going to happen in the future that we should know about? So tonight we're going to talk about 4 different things. We're going to talk about family caregiving. So relationships from raising children where in a sense you are caregivers to caring for elderly and aging parents, which is different, but yet there are similarities. Unexpected issues like, oh my gosh, I didn't know nursing homes cost this much, or why doesn't Medicare pay for this? And why didn't anybody tell us about this? And then navigating family relationships, and then also navigating the healthcare system, which is a whole nother part of being a caregiver that most people don't realize is going to come into their care situation. So the goal here is really to help you, regardless of whether you are new to caregiving, you're not a caregiver yet, you're already doing this. The goal here is to give you some information to help you avoid being surprised by all of those crazy and unexpected things that are going to happen. And so as always, I like to give a little bit of background, a little bit of context about this and kind of why we don't really talk about this. Well, the obvious is that society in general doesn't talk about aging or healthcare issues. And we as individuals don't talk about it until we start having these problems, which, depending on your stage in life, could be when you're very young or could be in your middle ages, or maybe not until 70. The other part is that healthcare is this whole thing that consumers may not be involved in or may not understand. And much of it's because we rely on the government and the healthcare lobby to just take care of all of this for us. But there's these huge gaps between what the government and legislators want from healthcare and what consumers want from healthcare, which is why family caregivers get so frustrated. So for these reasons, conversations like this are extremely important so that you can learn the challenges that healthcare faces in providing care to consumers, but also the challenges that caregivers face in trying to get the care they want from the healthcare system. There's always 2 sides to every story. And so based on my 20 years of experience working with families and consumers, what I've come to see is that consumers and caregivers and the elderly are so vulnerable. And this is due to a lack of information and support and education about caregiving, and just not really knowing that this is something that you should plan for. While sometimes there's a reference to planning for retirement and aging, that's kind of the pleasant part of aging. We don't really plan for the part of aging that involves having health problems and getting sick and having health expenses. And also the effects of being that caregiver. So caregiving can affect your relationships, your marriage, your career, raising your children, saving for your retirement. Many times it affects the health of the caregivers. And so let me just give you a quick example from this week just to kind of work us into this subject. So I was talking to a family caregiver who said, oh my gosh, can you believe we had to pay $41 an hour for an in-home caregiver for my loved one who was in the hospital and came home and needed 24-hour care for a very short period of time. This was quite a shock that Medicare or some other insurance program didn't pay for this. So if you do the math, $41 an hour, 24 hours a day, $984 per 24-hour period of caregiving. So I don't know how many people can afford that. That is $29,520 over a 30-day period if you needed 24-hour care at $41 an hour from a caregiver. So in a sense, 1 month of in-home care can be more than most individuals earn in an entire year of their life. And then if you look at nursing home care can average between $7,000 a month, $10,000 a month, $12,000 a month. Well, if you take the average $10,000, you have $120,000 a year. Again, that is more than most people make in an entire year. So how on earth do consumers plan for all of this? And when you hear these numbers, do you ever wonder why healthcare spending in the United States is about 60% of the federal budget? So, what I want you to think about as you hear a lot of the stories that I'm going to tell in this time that we're together is what can you do with this information? How can you learn from it for yourself and your spouse and your aging parents and your grandchildren? Because the goal here really is to prepare for the future, to avoid surprises, and to learn how to minimize the likelihood of you being in poor health, needing care from your family, experiencing all the stresses that we're going to talk about. So let's just talk about, how does caregiving begin? Well, it begins long before we actually think it does. Most of us relate caregiving to caring for aging parents, but caregiving really starts the day that we're born. We have parents who care for us at birth. And because this is part of a family relationship, we don't really think about it as being a caring person or being a caregiver. We are more, parents who have children, or a son or a daughter who have parents, and vice versa. And so we don't really think about these relationships until like true caregiving starts, which is the first time you have to change depends for your parent, or you're managing medications or going to doctor appointments and you're losing sleep and you're giving up your career and your personal life and all of this stuff. You're spending your retirement savings on caring for a parent and cooking and cleaning and everything else that takes away the personal relationship of being that husband or wife or son or daughter. And it makes you feel like this person who does tasks all the time. You're constantly running around doing things and you're missing that family relationship. And while raising children may have some similarities to caring for aging parents, mostly all the stress that's involved, caring for aging parents is really this unknown that makes you feel like you're on this roller coaster, but it also makes you think a lot about your health and your mortality, which in the long run really can be beneficial if it helps you plan. It also helps you survive situations where your elderly parents may need help and you're saying, Mom or Dad, you need a little bit of help. And they're saying, oh, honey, we are fine. We don't need anything. But yet these unexpected situations keep happening where they do need help and you have to keep showing up. And all you're thinking is, oh my gosh, what is going to happen next? I'm going to have to do something about this. My parents are in denial. They don't want to talk about it. So an example of this is I spoke to a caregiver this week, and her mom is constantly falling. 4 a.m., 7 p.m., they're going to the hospital emergency room. And mom lacks the insight that she has poor balance and she won't use a walker. And so how do you manage in those kinds of crazy situations? Well, with many of my clients over the years, it truly was a situation of, I know this isn't good, and they don't realize the consequences. So some accident is going to force a decision about using a walker or breaking a hip and going to the hospital and a nursing home and then a care community. So in a sense, caregivers can feel pretty helpless about what's going on because you can't control the situation. You would love to, but there are so many situations that are just outside your control because you're involved with other people and your parents have choices that they can make. And so that really takes us into the part of caregiving where we feel so out of control. So, how do men manage caregiving versus women? Some of these may be purely obvious to you, but We'll go through them. So men tend to look at things more logically instead of emotionally. And they see caregiving as this problem to be managed. So they make lists and they schedule things and they do things. Now, women, on the other hand, were more emotional, and that comes from being a mother. So mothers have to nurture children and show emotion to children. And so all of that becomes part of women as caregivers, where men will go outside to find help. Women tend to want to do it all themselves. Men are more likely to hire outside caregivers. Women do it themselves until they run themselves down and then hire outside caregivers. But men will do that because they're not comfortable sometimes doing personal care tasks like bathing and changing diapers and things like that. Although I know plenty of men who do these care tasks for their mothers and for their wives. And so if we look at caregiving, man's first role, if they're married and have children, is kind of this: I'm the provider for my family and I take care of my family and I just do it and I don't complain, and that's how I do it. And so that translates to men being caregivers, saying, well, I just have to do this and I've got to make it happen and I can't complain. So men are less likely to seek caregiver support groups and caregiver education. They want to do it themselves. Where women, on the other hand, are more likely to seek that kind of support, which is positive. And so let's kind of talk about caregiving for children and then caregiving for elderly parents. So there's similarities, but there's differences. So with children, there's a difference between caring for children who are healthy and who are growing up, or some parents do have disabled children who are sick and need more care and probably won't get healthier throughout their lifetime. So that's kind of where the similarity between caring for children who are sick and caring for elderly parents comes in. Now, other similarities that you will find when you're caring for an elderly spouse or a parent or grandma, grandpa: sleep deprivation. If you are a new parent with a baby, you're going to be sleep deprived for, months, maybe a couple of years. Caregivers who are caring for sick family members, this caregiving can go on. You may think, well, it'll be a 6-month project. Well, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, you're still doing this. 20 years from now, you're still doing this. Many caregivers are permanently sleep deprived, and especially if you have someone with Alzheimer's or dementia in your family, they can get their days and nights reversed. So while you think you should be sleeping at night, they're up and they're getting into all kinds of things and they're walking out the front door of the house and you have all of these worries. So caregivers lose a lot of sleep and you kind of get used to being sleep deprived. Then we have this diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, which many caregivers face. That is a total game changer because it's learning how to talk to your parents or loved ones who can't really have rational conversations anymore. So you can't reason with them to say, well, mom or dad, you should do this, because they don't understand that because of this gap in their brain up here, this gap in cognitive ability. And so eventually that person who is your parent may start to have behaviors and say things that you never would have expected them to say. And you're thinking, who is this person? It's not the mom or dad I love. And it really isn't because of that disease. I have a lot of young caregivers in their 20s or 30s who will contact me and say, I don't know what's wrong with grandma or grandpa. They seem like they're crazy and they're angry and they're mean all the time and I'm afraid of them. Well, many times it's because Alzheimer's or dementia is there, but it's undiagnosed. And so learning how to interact with a parent or a loved one with dementia is really something that caregivers want to learn and want to embrace because it makes that caregiving easier. But it is emotionally hard because you're looking at this person who took care of you thinking, oh my gosh, I have to take care of everything for them. When you are raising children, you go on family vacations, Disneyland, you do great things, you go camping. Your vacations when you're older and you have parents are much like vacations were in my family. Now, my parents passed away over 25 years ago, but I would go home for a vacation and it would be because my mom was having surgery or my dad was having surgery. My brothers and sisters would come home and it was because mom needed help with something around the house or my brother was really good at doing repairs for my parents who couldn't do those anymore. So a lot of times your family vacations when you're caring for parents or loved ones are work vacations. They're really not pleasurable vacations. And if you are a full-time caregiver for a parent, or you're living with them or they're living with you, vacations are non-existent. Caregivers don't get vacations. Many caregivers do this 24/7, day in and day out. This could be your mom caring for your father or your father caring for your mother. Then we have all of these emotions that surround caring relationships in our families. So if you are raising children, you may be looking forward to graduations and weddings and having grandchildren and all of this really great stuff. Now, if you're caring for aging parents, your emotions can be all over the place because you're kind of watching them decline and you're worrying about what will happen next, like we talked about, or you may be talking about really practical things. Do you want to be buried or cremated? Should we get your estate plan done? How are we going to pay for care? What money do you have? Are we going to have to look at Medicaid or public benefits? And then other things like driving the car. Remember when you were 16 and you couldn't wait to get your driver's license, and now you're seeing your kids and they want to get their driver's license, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, our car insurance is going to skyrocket. Well, when your parents get older, driving becomes risky. They may be having car accidents. They may have dementia. And so you as a child are having conversations with an 85-year-old parent saying, I don't think you should drive anymore. And your parents are saying, what are you talking about? I can drive as good as I can when I was 16. I'm not giving up the car keys. And so when you're raising children and they're young, more or less they listen to you because you're the parent. When that role reversal happens, your parents don't necessarily listen to you and they don't necessarily want to take your advice because they look at you as like that 16 or 20-year-old kid who doesn't know much. And so sometimes you do have to consult care managers or elder care consultants like me who come in and have conversations with your parents that are less emotional because we don't really have any vested interest and we don't have that history. Then, as we have seen with COVID, the health of your aging parent or even yourself can change overnight. When you're raising children or when you're young and you get sick and maybe you get a cold or you break a bone or something, you heal pretty quickly. But for your parent, a cold can turn into pneumonia, a fall can turn into a hip fracture, into a nursing home stay, into a hospitalization. Our parents die from things that we survive quite easily when we're young or when we have children. And then if you remember when you were young, did you have competition between your siblings for, who was mom or dad's favorite or who got the most attention? Well, when you're older, that kind of changes. And you can resent your siblings who are maybe not helping as much with mom or dad because you're doing all the care. And so you have all of these disagreements. And then money comes into the picture. So you're raising your children. You might be, setting aside money for their college education or your retirement. And then all of a sudden your parents need care. And you find out they have no money to pay for care. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Do we stop saving for our children's education or stop going on vacation? How do we manage all of this financial stuff that comes up? Because many of your parents may need help paying the bills or help paying for their health care. And that's another conversation. So all of these things that translate from caring and raising children translate in a way to caring for aging parents, but the situations are slightly different. There's also a lot of family complications that you may see today that don't make any sense, but when you're older, you'll look back and you'll think, wow, that was probably not a good decision. And this is kind of why family caregiving relationships become very complicated and very emotional. So this is kind of like the foresight, hindsight conversation. So let's say that you were young or are young, or maybe have kids that are younger. So young child with a middle-aged parent who's sick and a working parent. That child can have to grow up very quickly because they start helping care for a sick parent. And maybe if there are siblings, they're helping with their younger brothers or sisters. And so that kind of thrusts children into this caregiving role very early in life. So they take on adult responsibilities. And They spend more time at home versus socializing with their classmates or participating in school activities. Now, because of all these responsibilities, children can become very anxious if they don't have that emotional support. And they go to school and they can't concentrate. So they may be seen as problem children because the teachers don't know what's going on in the family. And the children certainly don't want to say anything. A lot of children who care for their parents actually hide what's going on in their household. Because if their peers find out, sometimes they get bullied at school. And then these children, because of all these worries and anxiety, begin to have their own health problems. And these health problems last for years and sometimes throughout their life. There are actually published studies on this part of young children who become caregivers at a very early age. And then so we can translate this to other cultures. So Hispanic cultures, Asian cultures, other cultures, family takes care of family, and children will grow up and have a lot of adult responsibilities, but those could be different. They may not be caring for a sick parent. So, in a lot of situations, children are just thrust into these situations where they're becoming adults at a very, very young age, and that has a lifelong effect. So, let's kind of flip that around to situations where they're a married couple, and that couple change their lives to focus on a child or children. And they don't go out with their friends and they don't socialize. And so those children become their total focus. And as the children are raised, the children get all of mom and dad's attention. And so the opposite happens. The children begin to expect and feel entitled to their parents' attention and to their parents paying for things and their parents' money. I've had many situations where parents become emotionally dependent on their children and vice versa. And later in life, it gets complicated when parents may have one child who has lived in the basement and that child is 50 years old, maybe one of your siblings. And the parents die, and this child doesn't know how to get a job or do dishes or make dinner or do anything. And you, as their sibling now, are responsible all of a sudden for not only taking care of one of your parents, because the other one passed away, but you are inheriting this brother or sister and you're having to become a caregiver. And then there are other situations where maybe one of your brother or sisters never moved out of the house and they've become that caregiver for your parent. And all of a sudden you find out that, oh my gosh, your brother or sister have been taking advantage of your parents' finances, or there's some kind of abuse going on there. And you're surprised because you just thought, hey, I don't have to deal with my parents. This is great. My brother or sister are taking care of everything. And then you find out what a nightmare that's become. Then all of a sudden you're involved in that. Then we have situations where caregivers do too much. You may start wanting to help your parents and you take on all these responsibilities, not thinking about the fact that you're taking away things from your parents that they could actually still do. Then you become burned out, and then you're angry that your parents aren't doing more, but yet you stepped in and started doing too much. So these are kinds of a lot of the things when caregivers come to me saying, oh, how did we get into this situation? It's all these things that you really don't think about the long-term consequences. You're trying to solve a very short-term problem in an easy, quick way, and it's faster and you can do it and it's great. But it always doesn't work out the way that you think. So let's talk about a short list of things that everybody should know about care and caregiving. And again, some of these are going to be obvious, but some of these are going to be maybe aha moments for you where you're thinking, wow, I should have known about that, or why didn't I think about that, or this is really great, I need to do something about it. So here's the obvious, okay? When we get older, we don't need care because we're healthy and we're active. We need care and help from others because of the opposite. It's because we have a disability or we've had an accident or our health changes. Now, the interesting thing is all the research shows that after age 30, so I don't know how old you are, but think about this. After age 30, your physical abilities, your muscle strength and your ability to do things declines by about 1% every year. So look at yourself and ask the question, if I'm 50 today, can I still do all those things I did when I was 30, or is it more difficult? Am I physically as in good of shape as I was when I was 30? Do I have more health problems? This is a great opportunity to look at your health and say, wow, I should probably pay more attention to this stuff, because if I don't 20 years from now, wow, I've changed this much in 20 years, another 20 years. How much different, how much worse could this be? And then I want to talk about the healthcare system because this is very complicated. Consumers are shocked to learn that Medicare doesn't pay for all of the care when you're older. It doesn't. That reference earlier to $41 an hour for an in-home caregiver at, a cost of almost $1,000 a day, $30,000 a month. Families are shocked and you're thinking, how on earth am I going to pay for this? Well, your parents may already have health issues, so it may be a little too late for them. It's not that you can't manage the health issues because you can, but it's not too late for you and your children and your grandchildren to pay more attention to your health. You are much better off looking at your health and how to take preventative measures than relying on health insurance to take care of you when you're older. Very simple example. So I just spent personally 7 months arguing with one of the biggest health insurance companies in the United States about a copay for my flu shot that I got August 20th of last year. Okay. I never paid a copay before. And all of a sudden I go to the pharmacy and they're like, well, you owe us $45. And I'm like, how can I owe you $45? They're like, oh, your insurance company is declining the claim. So I wanted the flu shot, so I paid $45 knowing that I was going to go complain to my insurance company. But most consumers in that situation would be like, there's no way I'm paying $45 for a flu shot. Are you kidding me? I used to get these for free. Why do I have to pay now? So, honestly, I've spent hours dealing with this, hours on the phone with the health insurance company, hours on the phone with provider, the pharmacy, online with the Colorado Department of Health, because that's where I live, the complaint division, going back and forth. And I'll tell you, they want to dismiss this as quickly as possible. Well, I am on my third complaint because every time I get a response from the insurance company, the Colorado Division of Health says, oh, your problem solved. They answered you. I'm like, they answered me, but they didn't solve my problem. So I have to keep going back. Most consumers would give up, but because I advocate for consumers, I want to actually understand what the heck consumers go through with all of these problems. Now, a copay for a flu vaccination is pretty simple, but if you're trying to appeal healthcare, treatments and chemotherapy and things like that, it's crazy. And then a nurse and I were talking the other day about these care denials. And she works with a lot of diabetics. And so her experience is an insurance company, rather than providing education about diabetes education, doesn't want to do it because that's prevention and they don't get paid for that, right? They would much rather pay to have a patient's leg amputated if they have diabetes than they would for health prevention. And this is the issue that I have with the healthcare system that consumers must be more proactive about. Because it brings up the question, so should consumers be more attentive to legislation about healthcare and following this money trail? Because the healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry pour a lot of money into lobbying. And I'll put some links into this transcript when it turns into the podcast. Millions of dollars, billions of dollars into lobbying. And the funding goes to the government and it goes to the legislators that we elect. So the question that we all should be asking is, who are these legislators legislating for? The people who fund their campaigns, the healthcare system and the pharmaceutical companies, or the consumers who should be speaking up? Now, I'll let you answer that question by how involved you've been in advocating for your healthcare needs with your local legislators. Research confirms that healthcare education in all areas, whether it's diabetes care or chronic disease or just simply diet and exercise, it improves healthcare outcomes so that when we're older, we don't need all of this money from the healthcare system. Education reduces poverty. It helps career development and employment and all of that. So as you get into caring for your elderly parents, you're going to start to work with hospital systems and nursing homes and assisted living communities and occupational therapy, physical therapy, all of these systems that have their rules and regulations. And this is partly why consumers get frustrated with the healthcare system, is because they have a lot of regulations that unless you know exactly what they are as a consumer, or you're very persistent and you know how to work around them, can really be quite a struggle and quite a frustration for consumers. And then, in my experience, again, 20 years caring and helping family members, doctors can refuse treatments. Doctors can see older people as old and dispensable, meaning that they'd rather care for younger patients. So, story of one of my clients, I had a client who lived in an assisted living community, and I go visit him one day and he's doing great. Then the next morning I get a call from the community saying, "Oh, Mr. So and so can't get out of bed. I think we need a wheelchair for him." And I'm like, "Well, why do we need a wheelchair? Yesterday he was walking, he was fine, everything was good." And I'm like, "Well, he can't get out of bed." And so I start asking questions. What is his temperature? Did he sleep last night? What's his blood pressure reading? What's going on? And through all of that, I realized that he had had a serious change in condition. I had them send him to the emergency room. Well, as it turned out, he had pneumonia. Now, pneumonia for older adults can be serious, but for my client, he didn't get sick very often. So I knew that, like many family members would know, if he got some antibiotics and got treatment, he'd be fine. But he was in the intensive care ward, and the doctor calls me, and the doctor says, "Oh, Pamela, I think we should just let him go. He's 95 and lived a good life, and we just probably shouldn't treat him." And I'm like, "Oh, no, doctor, I'm his court-appointed guardian. I'm his legal representative, and I know that he'd want to be treated, and I know that he will do very well once he gets the care." Well, the backstory is they had younger people who needed those beds in intensive care, much like what we've seen go on with COVID. So if you as a family member don't know what your loved ones want by having these conversations before these situations happen, you may not advocate. You may agree with that doctor who says, "Oh, we should just let them go." You have a duty to advocate for your parents. You have a duty to advocate for your loved ones and stand up to the healthcare system. And it can be very, very intimidating. It can be very, very challenging. So let's kind of go back to, costs of care. We spoke about this before, but aging and being sick is very expensive. And the quality of our health really is more in our control than we think. A lot of 20-year-olds will say, "Well, I can't do anything about my health. My mom and dad have health conditions and I'm probably going to have that." Partly true, partly not true. Hereditary is only part of health. It's also what you do every day. Do you exercise? Do you eat well? Do you take vitamins? So while it may be a little too late for your parents to totally turn back that clock, it's not too late for you or your children or your grandchildren. And it's really not up to, unfortunately, the healthcare system, at least yet, to educate us, not up to our doctors or anyone else, because that's not what they get paid for. Okay. The healthcare system gets paid to treat sick people. And if you, again, follow what's in the press, there's been a lot of press recently about CEOs of healthcare systems making millions of dollars in compensation. Again, I'll put links in the transcript so you can read it. I'm not making it up, but the healthcare system makes a lot of money. And so there was a study that was released a couple days ago from the John Hartford Foundation and a healthcare organization called FAIR out of New York. And the gist of the article is saying that consumers want more healthcare transparency. They want to know what healthcare treatments cost, but they're afraid to ask. And having that information would help healthcare consumers make better decisions about treatments that they want or don't want, especially at end of life. And so the moral of this story really is that don't hesitate to ask your doctors about costs of treatments or care. And if you get a treatment and it's denied, advocate for why it's being denied. Don't just take no for an answer. So here's a simple example about hip fractures in older adults. So hip surgery, the cost to the hospital system and the doctors is around $80,000 for one little hip fracture. Okay, your parent who is falling at home that you're worried about all the time is saying, "I don't want to use a walker. Walkers are for old people. I'm okay." But what responsibility do we as consumers to say, "Well, wow, mom or dad, if you fall, do you know that's $80,000 to the healthcare system?" Even though we don't see most of it because Medicare is going to take care of it, the hospital system still bills for it. And somebody gets paid for it. And it comes out of the whole United States healthcare budget. that is now 60% of the entire budget of the United States. Again, facts. So we have to look at where is the consumer responsibility to do the right thing and to be more thorough in asking about healthcare costs and prevention and all of that. So let me talk about for a minute caregivers and work. So caregivers take time off work to take parents to doctor appointments, come in late, leave early. Your parents may call you 50 times at work, and that, distracts you. So a lot of caregivers will say, well, I should just quit my job to take care of my parents. But what you don't realize is keeping that job, maintains income for you, but a lot of caregivers go to work to escape the stress of family caregiving. It's an outlet for caregivers because if you are a 24/7 caregiver, you give up your friends and your social life and your work and everything like that. And the only contact you have is with that person you are taking care of. You don't realize how stressful that is until you've done it. And then you look back thinking, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have given up that job. Now, women, statistics again, who drop out of the workforce to do that are more likely to live in poverty in old age because you don't have the retirement savings. You don't have the contributions to Medicare and Social Security. But yet you don't think about that until you learn that the majority of older people in nursing homes or older people who don't have other people to care for them at end of life are women. And why is that? Well, because men die first, okay? Men, fathers, spouses die first. And why is that? Well, again, more research, but men will engage in sports where they have accidents or riskier behaviors. Maybe they go hunting and have a shooting injury, or they ski and injure themselves that way. And men don't usually like to go to the doctor. So they get less attention to their health. They pay less attention to their health. And by the time they do go to the doctor, that condition that may have been this little nagging thing is now this huge thing that can't be reversed. And I can use an example from my own family for that. My brother was in his 50s. He came home from my father's funeral and got very, very sick. Had to go to the hospital, and he was diagnosed with leukemia. Now, he had not been feeling well for quite some time, but never went to the doctor. So he goes to the doctor, and he didn't even get to stay for my father's funeral. He was living in California at the time. He had to be life flighted back for treatment. He passed away within 12 months. So, man, if you're watching this, don't be that guy. For everybody, as much as you may not want to, there's benefits to establishing regular care with a family doctor, even if you just go once a year for checkup, getting your preventative care, your flu shots, your mammogram, your colonoscopy, regardless of what age you are. So the whole point of this discussion is to talk about all the scary things that happen if you are new to caregiving, or maybe you're in the middle of caregiving and these things haven't happened yet. It's all about prevention. Caregiving responsibilities can derail your job, your marriage, your retirement plans, your income, your savings, your health, your family relationships, everything, unless you start talking about this today within your family. So how do you do that? My recommendation is to seek out health information, ask your doctor questions, start doing your own research. There's a lot of chronic disease organizations out there, the Alzheimer's Association, the Heart Association, Arthritis Association. There are caregiver support groups, and men, I invite you to join. Women would love to have you, and you don't have to feel embarrassed about asking questions. There's no silly questions, and caregivers are the most caring people to other caregivers because most caregivers feel misunderstood. They feel ignored by their family members. They feel that outsiders don't understand what they're going through. And mostly because it's true. If you're not a caregiver, it's hard to understand what it's like watching the health of your parent decline, getting 20 calls a day at work, trying to deal with the healthcare system, not getting the care that you need, all the frustrations. It's a lot of work. So if you want to live the retirement of your dreams and be healthy in your later years and not have to deal with all this healthcare stuff, start advocating today. Start taking care of your health today. So I want to thank all the caregivers who posed all of these questions so that I could do this monthly live stream. Please do communicate with me on my social media channels, which are LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, my YouTube channel, where I do a lot of videos where this video will end up. But communicate with me so that I have the topic for next month's live stream. I'm Pamela D Wilson. I am a caregiving advocate, expert, and speaker who supports family caregivers and advocates. And I also do one-on-one consultations. Have a fabulous rest of your day today and the evening. And until I see you again here next